So there's a reason to not have a PowerPoint presentation, which is that when I don't have one, then I tend to feel a bit lost. And I think that feeling lost, or when you are lost, there's a higher probability that something interesting and surprising can happen. So let's hope something surprising happens here, and let's hope I get completely lost. What I've decided to do is spend a fair bit of time on is to step back and look at the enterprise of nature education a little more broadly, so that we can discuss actually the basis and the assumptions on which this is happening. So a large part of I think what I'll talk about today is about just setting the stage, and then I hope in discussion we can also talk about some specifics of how different people are doing things and how we are doing things. Because, for example, there's a sort of the fundamental question which we often don't address ourselves as nature educators is, why should we care about nature? And this is not such a straightforward question, or rather it's a straightforward question with a not so straightforward answer. Different people have different answers. Many people don't actually have an answer or have not thought through an answer. So why care about nature? So on one end of the spectrum is the idea that we should care about nature because nature provides us goods and services that are essential to our well-being, our material well-being. We need clean air, we need drinking water, we need fertile soils, and without this, human civilization is essentially toast. Human civilization can't exist without these very basic needs that nature provides. My colleague Shankar Raman has written that these services that nature provides, this is really what we should call infrastructure. He says infrastructure is not roads and buildings and all. That's what we build on top of actually the natural infrastructure, because that's what underlies everything. Apart from air, water, and soil, a number of other things. Trees give us wood, forest plants give us medicines, new medicines to combat new diseases. If bees and other pollinators disappeared overnight, then half our crop, our agricultural crops, our food crops would disappear as well. There are a number of goods and services that nature provides for us. And nowadays we call these things ecosystem services, and people try and put an economic value on them, and so on and so forth. So I think it's very clear, maybe we can all agree, and if you don't agree, please raise your hand, we can talk about it. We can all agree that for the goods and services that nature provides, we need to be doing things as routinely as we provide health and education to our people, as we regulate drunken driving or adulteration of foodstuffs. It's in the same category. Our survival as a society, our well-being, material well-being as individual people depends on nature. So this I think is rather uncontroversial. Would everybody agree? So that's at one end of the spectrum though. At the other end of the spectrum, there are people who say that this may well be, but the material well-being that nature provides for us is not the sole value that we should have, or the value that we put on nature should not be calculated solely based on that. And the idea here is that we are actually creatures of nature. We are not apart from nature. To talk about humans and nature as separate misses a very important point. We're an integral part. And some symptoms of how closely we think about and interact with nature comes from an exploration of art and culture. And if we think of literature and poetry and visual art, sculpture, all of these mediums, stories, they're all suffused with imagery, with allegory, with metaphor that is drawn from plants and animals and rivers and mountains. And if you did a thought experiment and you imagine that all our art and culture was overnight purged of all reference to nature, I think you'd agree that it would be a much, much poorer society that we live in. We wouldn't have the metaphors of strength and cunningness and love and devotion that animals provide to us. We wouldn't have all kinds of other ideas and imaginations that draw from various natural beings and objects. So the notion here is that nature is part of our humanity, and as nature diminishes, we diminish. Our capacity for imagination and metaphor and love diminish as nature diminishes. So I'm going to focus on this second aspect, not on the material well-being and the services that nature provides, but on this second aspect, and especially in the context of children's education. I like to focus on this because of two reasons. One is I'm slightly uncomfortable with the idea of viewing children as agents of social change. I'm slightly uncomfortable with the idea, we can talk about this, of educating children in order that they will do something for the environment, either now or later in their lives. And again, we can talk about the second reason I don't focus on the material well-being part of it, is that I'm aware of a great hypocrisy among urban, middle-class, English-educated people telling rural and marginalized and deprived communities that they should use fewer resources and so on, because the earth is hurting. And so for that reason, I like to use the term nature education rather than conservation education or environmental education. But this, of course, is a matter of opinion. Does anybody have anything to say at this point? Or shall we have a quiz? Yes.
Completely agree with you about the metaphor and the allegories and the analogies which are there from nature, and they're full. I mean, children's stories are also full, not just the classic poems or odes and elegies, but I think that's also changing in children's literature. Yeah.
It is.
In the modern literature, if you see, it's more to do with what they see in the life around them. So that's the other worrisome aspect.
I agree. And yesterday, I remember somebody, there was a discussion about how stories need to be drawn from children's experience so they can make a connection. And I'd like to suggest also the opposite, that we should have stories that are far removed from a child's experience, because that's what allows them to imagine other unexperienced worlds and unexperienced societies, unexperienced emotions, for example. And I think nature can provide that a lot. Yes?
I'm glad you said that you're only slightly uncomfortable with this idea of children as agents of change.
Yes.
If we admit that the human impact on the environment has been so great,
yes,
to an extent where now we're talking about the Anthropocene as the human age on Earth, isn't it important that we actually do engage with children and say these are the mistakes that others may have made, we including ourselves, so that we're not hypocritical about it, to sensitize the children to not only the impacts they could have, but also to be very aware of their impacts, and therefore to then say, if this is going to be my impact, I should be conscious of how I interact with the environment.
Yeah.
So in that sense, while you may be a little uncomfortable with this, and I think I know where you're coming from, but I'm not sure, but isn't it important that we also actually equip our children to think critically about their role in the environment?
Yeah, I think the question is when to equip them. I'm uncomfortable with the idea in part because I'm uncomfortable with the notion of burdening children with problems that they have not created, that we have created. And I know that children, my daughter, I have an 8-year-old daughter who some months ago couldn't sleep one night and was crying uncontrollably, and finally when my wife figured out why, she said that she was worried about the ozone hole. I don't think children should worry about climate change or the ozone hole or anything like that. I'll come to it a little bit later actually, what I think we should be talking to children about. But let's do this quiz anyway. Okay, so this is an easy one. So is anybody who doesn't know what this is, this sound? Nobody wants to admit anyway. So that's a koel, iconic bird of India. And something interesting, can somebody tell me something interesting about this bird? It lays its eggs in, it's a parasite, it's called a brood parasite. It lays its eggs in the nest of other birds. It doesn't build its own nest, it doesn't know how to build its own nest. It lays its eggs and flies away forevermore. It doesn't take care of its young and so on. So a lovely lesson we can learn from nature, right, about... okay, what about... bird we've been hearing around? No? Coppersmith, yeah, coppersmith is a little bird. Anything you can say about coppersmith? If you don't know what it looks like, we've got some material out there which will tell you what it looks like. It's a plug for material. Okay, how about this? Who said that? Somebody said? You said. Hoopoe, great. Hoopoe, anybody know what a hoopoe looks like apart from you? No, not you either. Yeah, it's a beautiful orange and black and white bird with a long curved beak, and it forages on the ground. It's got a big crest, and when it's alarmed, the crest goes up like that. And of course, we find it very cute. Hoopoe, by the way, the Persian word name for it is hudhud. And all of you know of the cyclone hudhud, named after this bird. Very unfortunate, I don't know why. Completely innocuous, harmless bird, the cyclone was named after it. So, let's try and use our imaginations a little bit. Imagine that you're a black-winged kite. A black-winged kite is a bird about this big. It's got a white belly, steel gray head and back, and black on the wings. It's a hooked beak, it's a kite, it's a bird of prey, and it's got fierce red eyes. And you're a black-winged kite that's hovering above a grassland in Gujarat. You know, maybe about 500 meters up. Black-winged kites they've got long pointed wings, and what they can do with this is they can hold their wings at an angle such that if there's sufficient breeze, they can stay pretty much stationary, absolutely rock steady. And the reason they need to do that, of course, is that they're hunting lizards and mice, and they need to be able to look, they have very acute vision, they need to be able to see them. So this black-winged kite is hovering absolutely stationary up in the, above the grassland, and down below is, you know, kilometers and kilometers of waving golden, you know, grass. There's a small herd of antelope, there's something called blackbuck antelope native to India. There are two fawns that are playing with each other, and their mothers are sort of worriedly looking around because there are two wolves underneath a tree that are watching this entire scene very carefully. And as this kite sees all this, it also suddenly notices the telltale urine trail of a mouse. And it can tell this because mouse urine reflects light in the ultraviolet. And well, we cannot see ultraviolet, birds can see in the ultraviolet. It's a telltale sign that there's a mouse burrow or something over there. And down under the grass, there's a beetle rolling a ball of dung down the hill, down the hill, down the hill, trying to find a place where it can store the dung and lay its eggs. So rather than this kite coming down to hunt the mouse, let's imagine this is a slightly not superhuman, but abnormal kite, which can go high, 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 as high as, let's say, 8 kilometers, which is about the limit at which birds can breathe. The oxygen is too thin over there. And at that point, you can clearly see the curvature of the horizon of the Earth. And let's say it goes even higher. It goes, you have to use your imagination really, halfway to the moon. And let's imagine that time speeds up. And we have this flickering day and night, one important cycle that the Earth goes through. But we also have the seasons. And now the kite can look at the entire globe. And it can see in the northern summer, the northern hemisphere pulses green. And as it becomes winter, it pulses brown and white. And it pulses green and brown and white, green, brown, as the Earth revolves around the sun. And the seasons pulsate. This is the pulse of the Earth. Imagine this kite now looks away from the Earth into outer space. And it sees billions and trillions of stars and planets, and there's nothing there. There's nothing there. The only life we know is on this planet, on this small, innocuous planet. And imagine that on this planet, there are 1 trillion trees. And these trillion trees are photosynthesizing, they're breathing. Underneath the trees on the ground, there are 100 trillion insects, ants and beetles. And inside the ground, in the air, in the water, there are trillion microbes, bacteria and so on. All of these are breathing, they're making food or eating food, they're reproducing, they're dying, they're decomposing, they're springing anew. And all of this has been happening for, let's say, 3 billion years. And if those 3 billion years were compressed into the space of a day of 24 hours, then humans have been around for 3 minutes of the day. And modern humans, Homo sapiens, have been around for 3 seconds of that day. So I don't pretend to know what you feel when you think about this, if you've followed me and used your imagination. But to me, I feel humbled, I feel awed, I feel I want to know more about this, I want to engage with this. I feel privileged to live on an earth with such endless delight and surprises and diversity. I want to be able to show my daughters all this. I want them to be able to live in such a world where they can delight in this diversity and this wonder. And I feel sad and perhaps sometimes angry that I know, because I know that every passing minute and hour and day, this diversity, this richness is decreasing. So, that's just me. So, in the context of children's education, what can we do? I think that for children, and we can argue at what age childhood stops, but for children, I think we need to reconnect children with nature. We need to show them how the joy and the wonder and the curiosity and the awe that can be felt when you are out and thinking about these things and experiencing these things. That's the kind of approach that I think is needed. Maybe at the college level and with adults, we talk about the doom and gloom. But at this point, I think children should love nature. And they should learn to love nature, and that's not a bad thing. I think being outside. So, okay, that's my idea. And I'll talk briefly about what we do in Nature Conservation Foundation. But at this point, does anybody want to add something? Have I missed something? Is there another perspective that you'd like to bring? Maybe can we get somebody else, just so that, yeah. Arun, are you allowed? Okay, theek hai.
Yeah, just sort of, because we live in rural Kerala, I've just been noticing this. We take a lot of effort to do this, create complex activities and toys and things for children. And nature is sort of infinitely complicated, right? Infinitely colorful and infinitely interesting. So I think it's grossly underutilized in this whole educational debate. Because we are trying to mimic things and create, I know somebody who's creating a laboratory to keep children interested. Just go outside, right? So that's what I'm just saying that we...
Can I just add to that? Actually, there's some work in the US and the UK that seems to show that if you take a group of children out, especially if you take them repeatedly out on nature walks and you immerse them in nature, this has an unexpected positive effect on their academic work in unrelated fields. And I don't know what to make of the particular evidence that's presented in these studies, but it's not all that surprising to me that when you get children engaged and excited about some complex system that's out there, they start to see patterns, or they learn how to find patterns, and they learn how to draw different kinds of metaphors. It's not surprising to me that this translates into the rest of their lives, including their academic lives. And in fact, the discussion about experiential and expeditionary learning, I think, is similar to this. So it's not all that's surprising. So, but I'm not focusing on that. Again, I'm not focusing on doing this as an instrument to increasing their academic thing. But it seems like there might be a commonality. Yeah.
What does one do about the distance from nature that modern urban lifestyle has in itself created?
Yeah.
The life choices one makes. If one looks at, say, tribal or agricultural lifestyles, like an animal, the struggle for food and life is integrated with nature, and within that is the wonder.
Yes.
For the wonder, you don't have to create some association with nature.
Yeah.
Whereas for an urban child, even if you take them out of the laboratory, it's a one-off kind of thing.
Yeah.
So for example, could inspiration be taken from initiatives like in Japan, there's this forest kindergarten, where children are allowed to struggle. They're not protected with an adult all the time.
Yes.
And it is if it's raining, they're struggling through the rain like a tribal child struggles here.
Yeah.
And so that integral, what you're saying, man as part of nature, not out of it. How can one start in that direction? People do, there are exceptional this thing, they keep on going into the more interior for their life, more organic life and so on.
Yeah.
But can that become a larger movement as such?
Yeah.
Not just for children, but for...
Yeah, I think that's the primary question that we have to struggle with. There is also research in the West, not in India, asking what are the life experiences that people have had or rather they've interviewed people who have made their careers out of something in the environment or have very strong feelings or behavior for the environment. And there are a couple of things that emerge very strongly about early experience. One is that the most important factor appears to be the experience of the child having spent time in a wilderness. Wilderness can even be a park that's not manicured, you know, having unsupervised play. Unsupervised play in a natural environment seems to be extremely important. So the child explores, the child tortures dragonflies, and you know how people do this. A lot of my colleagues, I've never done this, but a lot of my colleagues who are in wildlife and nature, when they were kids, they used to do all kinds of cruel things to insects at least, not to. But anyway, so the unsupervised play is now. The second one, which is also very difficult to provide to, is to have an adult who acts as a kind of mentor, an adult who is passionate about the subject, who you can go to for advice and information, and who maybe takes you around sometimes. And these two things seem to be very important. How to provide them, of course, is the big question. And I say a little bit about how some of the work that we've done in our organization has tried to do this. But again, to do this at scale is always the big question. All of us, many of us work very effectively at small scales, but large scales are always the problem. Yes?
I just want to add to the exercise that you just tried to dwell with. The issue of time is something that needs to be taken very seriously in this context, because the enormity of time itself is extremely humbling.
Yes.
And the accidents which now the knowledge systems today have cracked, which are, you know, we understand what is it, that accidents that happen on story of life on Earth also need to be, that kind of fascination and those connections need to be discussed with children. They need to be revealed with children. Whether they need to be done in little bit of didacticism, or it needs to be done in story form or whatever. There can be varieties of way, but one thing that exposure needs to be a planned exposure. Thing, it needs to be consistent. It needs to be something which is very concrete also. And time is one of the issues which needs to be repeatedly made concrete, because without that you will not understand what it's taken. Like, you were born on the 31st December when the year was almost ending. Yeah. But another similar thing is that the same child is also bombarded with many other things which are connected with nature in the planned curriculum that the child is going through. Yes. And so you need to have another tangent, another axis that will make more concrete meaning out of those things which are completely meaningless and abstract for the child. So what you're saying, what age group? There is already a pre-decided kind of bombardment by other planned curriculum. And so you don't have to fall in that trap. But at the same time, you need to understand that that information is also available to the child. The child has to struggle with it. And so you've got to kind of work within what is available in the child's world, which is not only nature today. A cognitive world, I mean.
Yeah, so that's the cognitive world. I've been thinking about this as actually a half emotional and a half cognitive problem. And maybe one of the difficulties that people we have working with curriculum within the school structure.
When you use the word cognitive, it doesn't mean devoid of affective. When you understand something, you also kind of generate feelings relation to that.
Yeah, sure, they're connected. Yeah. But to my understanding, the curriculum as stands now has two problems. One is that it's very much focused on problems and solutions and problems and solutions, which I have a bit of an issue with, and maybe outside this we can discuss a little further if you have a different opinion on that. And it focuses on this cognitive, this understanding aspect rather than the feeling aspect. And that pervades, when you think of anything that deals with values, we think that, we're raising children to be citizens, not just technicians, not just cogs in the machine. So where do those values come from? Does the school have an influence on those values? How can we influence without indoctrinating? These are all things that I don't have the answers to these things. So as a consequence, we've mostly worked outside the formal structure. There is an exception, and my colleague Pranav Trivedi has worked for 10 years now in the Spiti district of Himachal Pradesh, and we have another project going on. So I should say that the Nature Conservation Foundation, which has the acronym NCF, which confuses everybody. I'll just say my organization. We are primarily a research organization. We do some conservation work. This year we're 20 years old, and there's an education component to some of our work. So for the last 10 years, my colleague Pranav has been working over there, and he's managed to work with the formal school system, the government schooling system, to implement a nature education project that actually is implemented year after year. It's built into the curriculum now, and the keystone of that is a very, very life-changing experience. The children already live, Spiti, if you don't know, is in the Trans-Himalaya. It's across the crest of the Himalayas on the Tibetan plateau, very dry, very cold. And what these children do is they trek up about 500 meters higher to the next big valley where they pitch tents and camp for 3 days. And this is the first time they've actually pitched a tent, and they've actually stayed in a camp away from their homes. And a large part of what Pranav does there is just immersion into nature. The children sit by themselves and think about something. They choose a spot along the river and they think about something. There's nobody else there except the children. They sleep maybe, they go to sleep under the sun, this is in the summer. And they come back, and there are various other things of course, but they come back with, from what they write at least, with some really profound changes in their life. So that's just a single experience. Of course, what we would like to do is do multiple experiences, and he's been able to do that there, but again at scale, and I don't have the answer to that. The rest of what we do, including this of course, the main theme, if I were to summarize it in 2 words, the theme is to go outdoors. Go outdoors. You will not learn to love nature, you will not connect with nature if you are inside. So when we make our material and our games and so on, we make them such that, most of it, such that it's meant to be done outside. Done alone by the children or with a teacher or with a parent and so on. Actually, I'm not going to say much about the things we do. There's a poster that has, if you're interested in that. But since all of you, I thought, you're working in education, or this is actually rather than say we do all these things, this is a better opportunity to get ideas from you, people who work day in and day out with children, understand their pedagogy and development and so on. How can we do this better both at small scale as well as how might it be? Does scale mean it has to be done within the curriculum? If so, is it ever going to be possible? And if it were to be done outside the curriculum, is there a way to do it? Those kinds of things. Yeah, you had it.
Just a very small thing. I think it's also to do with experiencing diversity, giving children that first-hand experience of diversity.
Diversity of what?
Of life forms.
Oh, yes.
Of beings, and the fact that we experience nature differently.
Yes.
So there are different ways of engaging, and there isn't just that one way. I think that's rich because in the curriculum, we are so convergent. I mean, bringing children much more into convergence.
Yeah.
So that for me is an important element
Yes.
that I wanted to.
And I think that again, the diversity, not just of life forms, but about how they conduct their life, how they transact. I'll give you an example about sort of 2 kinds of beings. One are the ants and bees that we talked about this morning on our nature walk, and how all the colony essentially is females. It's composed of females. The entire million strong termite colony, or the few hundred ant colonies, are all female workers and soldiers, they play multiple roles. And little girls, I find this very fascinating. They love this. And when you see an ant, you refer to the ant as her and she. And she bit me, and she's a big, strong soldier ant with big jaws, and I better be scared of her and keep, her at arm's length, respect her. Or I can give you another example. Although most, and this is unfortunate, well, it just is, most mammal and bird groups are in some sense male dominated. Males are usually bigger than females. In polygamous groups of birds and mammals, it's usually one male and multiple females. But there are very key exceptions. There are at least birds where a single female has multiple husbands. And you highlight this, so it's not just the diversity of species, it's the diversity of behavior, the diversity of ways of making a living. And we, fortunately, unfortunately, we seem to draw lessons from the natural world, which maybe we shouldn't. It used to be thought that most birds are monogamous, and the Victorians took this as a great virtue and said we should be more like birds. Look, there's a male and a female, and they cooperate, and there's all harmony in building the nest and raising the young and so on. And we know now that the natural world is full of disharmony, right? And it's not just monogamy, it's not just polygyny with one male and multiple females. We also have polyandry. By the way, there's also polyandry in human societies, which perhaps is something we should point out a little more rather than think of the current norms as the norm. So diversity in a variety of ways, yeah.
My question is on technology and its role as both pros and cons in nature and working with children. What I mean is, you were talking about experiential, taking the children out, and when I was younger itself, we used to watch TV and watch Animal Planet and all, and so that way it helped to learn more things, but it also brought some distance.
Yes.
Today it's YouTube videos, and you can be anywhere in the world and watch everything. Now Spiti, just type it and see it. So do you find that it interests children to get to know more, or it just takes them away because now you can experience everything within a safe environment? Like, I see it as a double-edged sword. I don't know how you work with that.
Yeah, it is. Does somebody else want to answer that? I don't have to, or not answer, but discuss on this.
But that's not experience, though. You're just looking at something. On YouTube, if you watch something, I'm totally afraid of snakes. I can comfortably watch them on YouTube. If I see a snake, I'll die. So, but the thing is, the experience is a completely different thing. You're only looking at something. To me, that's not experience.
Yeah. Well,
so to take your point itself about snakes, yes, most of us would be too go close, and we'll never get to see certain things that also maybe the mating ritual or anything. So in some sense, it keeps us secure and lets us see things that we never do, and it can actually give you a sense of, oh, I'm doing so many things, I'm knowing about nature, but avoid that actual immersive experience. Yeah.
Secure. Has anybody been in an experience outdoors, away from the city and the safe environment, where you have felt scared, where there's been some kind of danger because you're lost, let's say, you don't know your way home or something like that? Somebody had that experience? I would. Lost. I think that be a dangerous situation and you emerging from it unscathed, that's important, can be utterly life-changing. You remember that experience forever, and it can change. If you are, and I've had a few of these trekking in the Himalayas where, there's been a snowfall, we've been blocked away from things, we're trying to climb down a frozen waterfall, and, you're sort of a whisker from serious injury. And these things have utterly, rather than pushing me away from that situation, they've actually drawn me to it. And life should not be about safety and security. It should also be about risk and danger. When you're talking about children, of course, this has to be controlled risk and danger. But that's one of the problems of technology. One is that it maintains its distance. The other is that it makes us feel that, the world is a wonderful and safe place. It's a wonderful place, but it's not necessarily a safe place, and we shouldn't pretend that it's a safe place. And we should, manufacture semi-dangerous situations, I think, if they don't regularly occur. I think technology can assist, but it cannot replace. And I think that pretty much everybody can agree on, I suppose. Yes, sir.
Okay. About the how we are using like outdoors. Like we have this expedition for grade 4 students, nature art teacher. And there I think we have taken this concept of form and function. How the form of a species affects the function and how function shapes the form. And then they study different birds like why the bill is shaped like this, or why let's say the snake birds, darter bird, long uh, neck, so like this, and then kingfisher. So and then they come and then study okay, what are the innovations which have been inspired by nature, like this, like what came from the spoonbill, or from the, like how velcro
That's right.
has been
From
inspired.
seeds, yeah.
So a lot of and this and we go to Bharatpur for this for 5 days, and this even we can do it. So you can do it even in your parks also. There are a lot of species. So just wanted to share that this is how we have using outdoors
Right.
and nature.
Right.
And it is we are doing for last 5 years, and it's working really well. And then we integrate story writing with this.
Yeah.
Right.
So blending in art and creativity is very important, I think.
Yeah.
People like me, I come from a science background, and we, I think, make the mistake all the time that we're talking about the science, we're talking about the scientific facts and this and that, but actually what's sometimes much more powerful is to include stories and creative writing and painting and all those sorts of things. Yeah.
I have two very basic questions to you. I don't know whether these are relevant, but these are something which we really face every day in our work. One is when we work with the teachers, they often say that the terms like, environmental education, this is called environmental science, there is environmental study, and now I just heard for the first time nature education. So, I mean, how these are different, and sometimes, it becomes very confusing how these are different. The second challenge what we feel is when we work with the teachers in the rural setup, this children of the rural schools, we talk about the curriculum which says that the previous knowledge of the child should be taken into the classroom, and in rural India, children know a lot about their nature, trees, everything. But we often find teachers saying that that's something they already know, and why should we give them something which they already know? And when we try to tell them, no, you need to build on the previous knowledge of the child, it's important to bring that into classroom. And they find it difficult to understand. They say, no, they already know. Let's give them something which they do not know. And unfortunately, we see teachers teaching environmental science in the classroom. I mean, they don't think of taking them outside because they feel they already know.
Well, I don't think the teachers are equipped usually to take children outside. So the first thing is I don't think there's an agreed upon taxonomy of what to call environment education or science or studies or whatever. So this is just the whim of whoever's setting the syllabus. Second is, I agree that children, especially forest-dwelling communities, have a lot of knowledge about nature. It turns out that agrarian communities often don't have that much knowledge about nature. So it's not as simple as urban-rural. It's actually more nuanced than that. But the key thing is that even if they already know it, the school system is where they learn to what is important and what's not in the world. And if the school system doesn't at all talk about this, they very quickly come to realize that this is not important. What I've learned, my stories and my culture and my traditions are not important. My knowledge about this is not important. So at the very least, it has to be emphasized and repeated, and the value has to be demonstrated to them so that they don't ignore it as time goes by. But of course, there are, all knowledge is incomplete, including the knowledge we bring. So one has to work together to build that knowledge. But I think the emphasis and repetition is certainly needed.
What I wanted to say was, it's not a question but a small comment, that in exploring or in being with nature for children, there has to be a small, there has to be a component of, non-protective approach. Instead of being overprotective about children, पेड़ पर मत चढ़ो, गिर पड़ोगे, इधर नहीं जाओ, cuts and bruises, even with parents to make them understand कि a few cuts and bruises is all okay, and ऐसा नहीं है कि हमारा बच्चा बाहर गया, कट पिट के आ गया, ऐसा. Even for children, I think they need to explore on their own most, so that they can get into bushes, get into little holes and see what is there, instead of being scared of doing it. So some amount of fearlessness and non-protective, protected environment in which they can just do whatever they like.
Yeah.
I don't look like it now, but I could climb a tree quite easily
I
when
can
I,
well
was
believe, yeah.
younger.
I can believe, yeah.
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 And I've been falling from here and there hundreds of times. But growing up in Burma and in Rangoon with a very different kind of a community, I could be bleeding from anywhere, and those people and those children would come with some leaf crushed in their palms and say, "Lo ye laga lo, theek ho jayega." And really speaking, I'm okay. I'm much stronger than many other younger people. Thank
Indeed,
you.
indeed, yes. I completely agree. I think I sort of alluded to those points earlier as well. But in addition to being not so protective about our children, I think we also need to be not so protective about about nature. In this sense, nowadays when most people take children on nature walks or so on, we are supposed to take nothing but this is the slogan, take nothing but photographs, leave nothing but footprints. And I utterly completely disagree with this. I think children have to get down and dirty. They have to pluck flowers and grub up the dirt, and they have to catch fish if they need to, or insects, and pick up the beetle and turn it upside down. And they have to do all these things. Otherwise, you're like in a museum, right? Everything is off limits. You can only see, but you can't touch, you can't crush, you can't feel, you can't. People have shouted at me because I've plucked a leaf from a tree and crushed it so that others can smell. I don't understand. So we need to. It has to be both ways. The children has to engage, has to do a bit of destruction. Children are destructive. And at the same time, nature has to take its slight revenge, as you say, in terms of cuts and bruises and so on. I completely agree.